Okay, shkoyach to you guys for coming. I know things are busy, but hopefully give a little bit of chizuk. Last week we talked about Hanukkah. We talked about Mahajim and Mahadran. We're not going to talk about that today, obviously. Instead, we'll talk about a bit of the candle lighting on Hanukkah. And I realize a lot of the Divrei Torah obviously revolve around the candles. That makes sense. But hopefully we'll see some things that are new and fresh. I hope, at least. Definitely coming from me. Just to start with something that may not be new, we know that the Maharal writes, right, that the open miracles, right, of the candles, right, sheds light on the hidden miracles of the war, right? We know there are two miracles that happen on Hanukkah, right? The miracle of the Nitzachon, the victory of war, that was perhaps a hidden miracle because that was, B'derech HaTeva. Okay, maybe sometimes the underdog wins in a battle or a game or a war or whatever. Could have written that off to human accomplishment. Fine. Then obviously his open miracle of, one bottle of oil, right, lasting, they should have lasted for one day, ended up lasting for 8 days. So the Maharal writes, excuse me, in Ner Mitzvah, right, that the open miracles, right, of the candles, right, shed light. The purpose of the miracle of the candles shed light on the hidden miracle of the war, right? That was the purpose of the miracle of the Neros. And this again, my Rebbe Rav Yosef Sachs pointed out several times that this is reminiscent of the Ramban at the end of Parshas Bo, when he talks about all the Makos, and he says that the Nisim Gluyim, the open miracles, shed light on the Nisim Nistarim, right, on the hidden miracles, right, just like when Akash Baruch Hu did the Makos, right, and did all these open miracles, right. So that proves that if Akash Baruch Hu can interrupt nature for to do whatever he wants at a certain point, that means that he must control nature all the time. Right, and that's just to read the lashon, right? I mean, anisim gedolim mifursamim adam modeh benisim anistarim. From the open miracles, a person admits the hidden miracles. Right, Jehem Yisod HaTorah Kula, which is the Yisod of the entire Torah. The basis for the Torah is the fact that Hashem controls everything at every moment and can change it whenever He wants. She'ein la'adam chelik b'Torahs Moshe Rabbeinu ad sheneman b'chol devareinu mekreinu shekulam nisim. Ramban is very harsh language. He says a person doesn't have a chelik in Moshe's Torah until you believe that everything, right, that happens to us is a miracle. Ein bahem teva min hago shel olam. There's no such thing as nature, meaning nature exists, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates and does. He's controlling it every single second. Everything is a nace, and simply the difference between what we call a miracle and something that we may think is not a miracle is simply frequency. Right? For the fact that the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening, right, is a miracle. Just like if the sun would stay in the middle of the night, of the sky for 3 hours in the middle of the day, right, that's also a miracle. But just the fact that we don't see that, right, just frequency. Okay, so that's the Inyan of Hanukkah. That the two miracles play off each other, says the Maharal. Again, this is quoted often in many different contexts. That basically the open miracles of the candles, right, it sheds light on the hidden miracles of the war, and we have to have also kind of a karzato for hidden miracles as well. Sifsei Chaim, or Rav Chaim Friedlander, who's Meshkiach Panovich, uh, in the last century. He points out, right, the fascinating contradiction though, and he explains it with this yesod, with this idea. Right? He says that if you look at the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Chaf Aleph, the Gemara there says, "My Chanukah." What is Chanukah? And Rashi explains, what's the Gemara asking? It says, "Al Eza Nes Kavuha." On which miracle did they set up the holiday? So the Gemara there mentions the nace of the menorah, of the candles, right, of the oil, and doesn't really mention, right, the miracle of the war. It does say that the Cheshvan defeated the Greeks, but it basically focuses on the miracle of the oil and the candles. And on the other hand, right, Sister Chaim points out that if you look at Alanisim, right, the Alanisim does the opposite, right? It barely references the oil, right, but says all about the war. Rabin be'ad miatim, Timeim be'ad tehorim, right, Rishayim be'ad tzadikim, right? Everything is about the war. So why is that? Why would the Gemara, right, kind of focus, right, on the miracle of the oil as opposed to the Alanisim, right, focus on the miracle of the war? So he explains that a nace, right? There's several words we have for a nace. A nace is what we translate as a miracle, but we also other words for a nace, right? The pasuk says that a nace, a miracle, is an os, is a sign, right? But you have that by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? That by when Moshe was by the burning bush, right? Kosh Baruch Hu, right, told him, right, to do these three miracles, right? If he points out that if that a miracle very often comes to kind of help a person or a people not fail in their emunah b'tachon. Just to read it for you, right? Moshe had said at the burning bush, right? I don't want to go free b'nai Israel because v'hein lo yaminu li v'lo yishmu b'koli. They're not going to listen to what I'm going to tell them. This is Perek Dalet Pasuk Aleph. And then immediately Hashem launches into the three miracles, right? Throw down your staff, right? And it'll turn into a snake. Put your hand into your shirt, and takes it out. It was tsaras, right? And if they don't believe that, then you'll turn the water into blood. And the pasuk says, and this is just a pasuk ches, "V'haya im lo yaminu lecha v'lo yishmu lekol ha'os harishon." If they don't listen to the os harishon, the first miracle that you do, ve'yaminu lekol ha'os acharon, they'll believe the last os, the last miracle. If they don't believe those miracles, right? Then you take the water, turn it into blood, etc., etc. So the Torah uses the word os and nes, right, interchangeable. And again, it's something that basically, like that Akash Baruch Hu does very often to keep us kind of rooted and kind of based in Emunah, right? Sometimes if Moshe is nervous that they won't believe that a Navi is true, right? So Akash Baruch Hu had to kind of fortify with a miracle, right? A miracle comes, right, that there's no ambiguity, right, as to who is running the world, right? It makes sure, right, that we all know, right, who's in charge, and it also, right, helps us make sure that we know who does the hidden miracles as well, right? I mean, if Bnei Israel is not going to believe that the Kosh Baruch Hu is in the Mashiach, right? So there was a miracle that was necessary, right, to show, right, who runs the world, and that says Rav Chaim Friedlander is why the holiday was kavua al nes pakashemen, that they set up the holiday. Right, if you're asking what is the basis of the holiday, that's the Gemara in Shabbos says it's based on the miracle of the oil, because that was the thing that helped us recognize Akash Baruch Hu being in charge, right? That had to be an open miracle. That was recognizable, something that kept our emunah, helped us realize what's going on behind the scenes, right? Behind the scenes, right, in a derech hateva, right, naturally, right, that was the war. That was what Akash Baruch Hu did for us by defeating the Greeks. When we say ala nisim, right, what is ala nisim? We say that in the bracha of Modim in Shmona Esrei, right? Why do we say it in the bracha of Modim? Because we're trying to give thanks for the miracles that Hakadosh Baruch Hu did for us. Well, what do we give thanks for? All of the miracles, right? Even the hidden miracles, especially the hidden, excuse me, the hidden miracles. We say Al Nisach Shabachol Yom Yimanu. That's in Modim on the miracles that you do every single day. Erev Vogav V'Tzarayim, morning, evening, and night. Well, I guess no, morning, evening, and afternoon, right? All the time. Meaning, Kosh Baruch Hu does miracles for us. That's the regular text of Modim, and then right after that we say Al Anisim. So the miracles that seem like nature, the Nitzin Hanistarim, the hidden miracles, right? That's what we say Modim for, because obviously we say Modim for the open miracles, but when we thank in Kosh Baruch Hu, when we're saying Al Anisim, right, that's for the hidden miracles. That's the breathing, the tasting, the seeing, the living, all the stuff that looks like nature. And that is also the idea of Pirsumi Nisa, of why it's such a big deal on this holiday, right? If you learn the halachos, right, a lot of the halachos are dealing with Pirsumi Nisa, publicizing the miracle. We don't really have that so much in other holidays. Some holidays sort of ish, but we don't have that, let's say, in Sukkot. We don't have that on Shavuos. We don't have that on Purim necessarily. We don't. It's very odd that that should be the basis of all the halachos. But if you realize that that is what we're trying to do, that we're trying to use the open miracles to shed light on the hidden miracles, and thank Hakadosh Baruch Hu, right, for those hidden miracles. So then, right, then makes a lot of sense, right? That is what the whole point of the candle lighting is for, right? That we have to make sure that someone is looking, and if no one is outside, so then you shouldn't light candles, or maybe you should, whatever. I'm not getting into a halachic discussion, but the whole basis of how long the candles have to be lit is Pirsumei Nisa, because that's the idea. We want to try and publicize the fact that Hakadosh Baruch Hu is running not only the open miracles, but the hidden miracles, and give us strength for that. Sister Chaim then further points out that the candles do something else, and this is going to lead us into a discussion, a point made by Rav Pinkus, and a fascinating point of Rav Pinkus. So let's just one to the next, right? Rav Sister Chaim points out that the Gullus of Yavan, again, when we're trying to remember, right, this was a very unique type of exile that Bnei Israel were in. Because Bnei Israel, right, normally, right, when we have a holiday, we left Mitzrayim, or we're celebrating the defeat where maybe, or sadly, we're celebrating tragedies that we were exiled out of Eretz Yisrael by the Romans or the Babylonians. Right? This is a very unique Galus Yavan, the exile of Yavan, but because we weren't actually in exile, right? We were in Eretz Yisrael, right? We had the Beis Hamikdash, right? But the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah Daf Tes that the Greeks ruled us for 180 years, so it was a bit of time, and they weren't there to exile us, they weren't there to kill us, they were there to convert us. Um, and it was fascinating. Rav Friedlander just phrases it in a beautiful way. He says it wasn't a gullus of Bnei Yisrael, right? It was a gullus of the Shechina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? It was an attempt, right, to make the Jews into Greeks, right? To make our, to remove our Torah observance, to remove our spirituality, right? And the pressure came, right, from not only the Greeks themselves, but also, right, from the Jews who wanted to be Greeks, right? From the Mityavnim, right? From the Jews who had turned into Greeks. And that, as you are probably aware, is eerily reminiscent of modern times, where we're getting pressure to not be from by the Goyim and also by, unfortunately, secular Jews as well, right? By Mimahim Manazet, right? And that's what Sifsei Chaim points out, that that's what we're addressing, right, in this modern time as well. And that gullus of Yavan, right, being in, let's say, especially, is very powerful nowadays, right, when we are actually in Eretz Yisrael. But as the Maharal, and this is we'll get to the Maharal in a second, but that's what, it's important to realize that that's the gullus of Yavan, and by Mimahim Bazman Hazeh, that's what we're fighting against right nowadays as well. As the Maharal says, again, we've pointed out, time is cyclical. We keep on going through the same tkufos. Right? Time is not linear, says the Maharal, but it's really cyclical, and then we keep on going back into the same. Right, Nisan has the koach of Geula, of redemption. Tishrei has the koach of newness and starting again, and Tshuva, and Elul is Tshuva. It's the same thing by Hanukkah. Right, we keep on going through those same tkufos. The Hanukkah has this challenge, right, that we face, and with the same challenges that the Jews face in the times of Hanukkah, we get that again in our time. Ramchal writes in Derech Hashem, right? Just to quote it, and shekol tikun nitkain va'or gadol shehir bezman me'azmanim b'shuv tkuvas hazmanahu, right? All the tikkunim, all the things they fixed, and the or gadol, and the great light that they had then, yair aleinu or me'ein hora rishon. We get that light as well, just like the light that was back then. Utchudash toldos hatikun, right? Ahu b'mei Kibil. Right? I mean, we also have the ability to affect the same Yeshua, the same Gula, the same redemption that we had back then. And again, this is Chaim, again, he just points out that our holidays are not historical markers, right? Most nations' holidays are historical markers. We don't believe in that. Each holiday is, as he writes, just again, the quote, the Lashon, because it's very powerful. All of the things that happened, all the salvations, all the shefa, all the blessing, haruchani, the spiritual blessing, ve'hagashmi, and also the physical blessing that was back then. Mitorim u'mitchadshim midei shana bizmanehem. Come again, right, and come again new, right, from right every single year, right, in the proper time. So that's the challenge we have this Hanukkah, to kind of reawaken ourselves to the same challenges and victories, hopefully, that the Maccabim and the Yehudim faced back then. Right, we have the same exact challenges nowadays, as we'll talk about in a second. So we have to understand what the struggle was of the Maccabim and the victory they had, right, over the enemy. So says Rav Chaim Friedlander also that the Gula was a spiritual one, as we've been talking about. The Gula was similar to Tzias Mitzrayim, right? Again, similar, as the Ramban writes, that Sefer Shmos is called Sefer HaGeula, right? Fascinating that the Ramban writes the nickname of Sefer Shmos, right? He gives nicknames to different parshios, to different Sfarim, and the Sefer Shmos he calls Sefer HaGeula, the Sefer of Redemption. But if that's really true, right, we might have thought that Sefer Shmos should end after Kriyas Yamsuf or Har Sinai, but we know that Sefer Shmos goes after Har Sinai. We get Mishpatim, we get the Mishkan. We have like 5 or 6 parshias until the end of they build the Mishkan, right? Egel Azov. So the Ramban writes that once the Jews, even though they were out of Mitzrayim, right, they were still, right, they were only considered to be redeemed until HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'hishra shchinaso b'neihem ad shenichshavu ga'olim. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shechina was amongst them, that's when they were redeemed, right? So that's the idea of redemption. Redemption is not a physical departure from some place, right? It's to have HaKadosh Baruch Hu amongst us, right? That's the idea of redemption. And I heard it from Shlomo Klagsbold, again, the Rav in Teret Nof here in the Shulei Davenet, and Rav Friedlander writes this here as well in Sifsei Chaim, that this concept is brought out even in creation and Sefer Bereshis, and it impacts on Hanukkah. How so? So Yavan, right, was one of the sons of Yefes. Right, if you look at the lineage of Noach obviously 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yefes, and Yavan is one of the sons of Yefes. And the Medrash in Bereshis Rabbah says, right, that V'haisa ha'aretz tohu v'choshech al pnei tehom, right, the pasuk second, third pasuk in Torah, right, the land was tohu v'vohu, v'choshech al pnei tehom, and there was darkness on the entire world, right? So he says tohu is reference to Bavel, vohu is reference to Madai. Okay, fine, but for us, what's choshech? Choshech is a reference to Malchus Yavan. It's a reference to the Greeks. And the phrase is, and this is important if you have spacing out for a second, right? That made the eyes of the Jews dark, in darkness in the eyes of the Jews with their gzeras. Why is Greece called Choshech? So first of all, I'll just point out that Mesilas Yesharim talks a lot about darkness, and this world being darkness, Olam Haza being darkness. He points out that there are two things that happen when a person is going through the dark. First of all, you don't know where you're going, and you could fall into some sort of pit and some sort of trap. And second of all, you mistake one thing for the next. Right? You think things aren't what they are, right? So you could either fall into a pit or you could think that a lamppost is a person or a tree is a person or whatever. So that is right, as the Mesilas Yesharim writes, that's the metaphor for Olam Haza, because very often, right, we get confused. We don't see potential spiritual pitfalls. We think that one thing is good and actually it's bad. And it's again, it's just a parallel as we'll talk about in terms of Greek and slash Western culture. If you're not using the Torah as your guide, it's easy to fall and doing things that aren't mutter. And it's very often a person thinks they're doing the right thing, right, in the name of whatever ism that you converted to. But okay, anyway, so the Sisach Chaim explains that Greek is called Choshech, right, in according to Jewish thought, but that's not actually, it's actually the opposite of what the world thinks, right? When we think of Greek culture and philosophy and democracy and science and chokhmah and all the intellectual realms that came from Greece, right? They called 100 years ago, they called that enlightenment, right? Advancement in philosophy and all that type of stuff. That was enlightenment. That was making making light. That was causing, right, not darkness, but light. Chazal called it darkness. Right? Why is that? Why did Chazal call it darkness? Because we do see that there is some sort of positivity, right, from the Greeks. We see that the Gemara Megillah Daf Tes says that the only language that you're allowed to translate the Torah into is Greek. You're allowed to write the Torah in is Greek because the language of Greek is beautiful. Probably called based on the pasuk Yaf Elokim Yafes V'Yishkol B'Hol Hashem. Okay, fine. The Maharal writes in their mitzvah that the Greeks had more chachma than all the other nations. So why is it choshech, right? This seems to be a surface level, seems to be enlightenment. It seems to be or. It seems to be light, not choshech. So Maharal writes that this is exactly what they wanted to make the Jews forget the Torah, because a person or a nation is only jealous of your rival, of your equal, right? Bodybuilders are jealous of those who compete against them, athletes as well, right? If you're the best of the other nations in Chachma, but there's this one nation, the Jews, who's smarter than you, so then you want to take it out, right? You want to make them forget, right, their Torah. You want to translate the Torah and Chachma and absorb it into your own culture, into your own Greek philosophy and wisdom, right? So that's why they were gozer, not that they should kill the Jews, that they should leave the Torah, and that they should, because they wanted the Chachma for themselves. They wanted the Jews to be Greek. They wanted the Jews to be Midyavnim, to convert to their Chachma, to have, so they could absorb it and, become, right, swallow it, right, and become, right, the most Chachma, dick nation in the world. And says Chaim, that was perhaps therefore the most dangerous galus, because there was a chance not that we all be destroyed physically. Kosh Baruch Hu promised we're not going to be destroyed physically. That's psukim in the Torah that Hashem will never, and Navi that Hashem will never destroy us. But there was a chance we could lose our connection to Kosh Baruch Hu. Right, and that's why the Greeks decreed, says Friedlander, against the uniqueness of Bnei Israel amongst the nations, Mila, right, against with their bodies, Shabbos with their time, against the concept of time, the uniqueness that we have, right? We get joy. A goy who is Shomer Shabbos is not allowed to Shomer Shabbos, right? Goy Shabbos Chayav Misa, right? If a goy keeps Shabbos, he's Chayav Misa. Beis Hamikdash is the kedusha of place, right? They basically try to make, right, all of these things, our physical bodies, our time, and our place, right? Those three, the way we have uniqueness amongst Am Yisrael, right? That's why they try to kind of impurify. What's the word? Bimetame, make impure, right? And those are all called an os, right? Shabbos is called an os, right? A milah is called an os. It's like a sign, right? It's like an open miracle, right? It's a thing that we point to show that we are, first of all, above and beyond the other nations, and also a sign of our ashkacha. When we rest on Shabbos, that's an osi beini v'nechem. That's a sign. That's like a miracle, right? That we kind of remember that Akash Baruch Hu is the one in charge, right, of creation and of all the backstory and everything going on behind the scenes. Right, Beis Hamikdash, obviously also a sign of Akash Baruch Hu's hashgacha. So that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to absorb our culture into theirs and eliminate, right, those things, right, that made us unique. So therefore, we light the menorah of Hanukkah, right, to focus and create the light in the darkness. Right, ki ner mitzvah the Torah or, right, that's the pasuk in Mishlei, right, ner mitzvah, that a mitzvah is a candle, but Torah is light, right, a mitzvah may light for a little bit, right, just like a candle kind of brings light for a little bit, but the Torah, right, having a life of Torah, that's light, that's a way of life, that's a light in the darkness. That's what our candles do on Hanukkah. But of Pinchas, brilliantly combines two Gemaras to give an even deeper insight and kind of flesh out what we've been kind of just talking about. This has all been, a prelude to where Rav Pinkus writes. Unbelievable shot, right? In Rav Pinkus's Hanukkah Sefer. So he says, as you know, the Gemara, yeah, we quoted the Gemara in Shabbos in Daf Chaf Aleph that says the mitzvah on Hanukkah, right, is to light candles, and it calls it Ner Ishu Beso, right? Again, the basic level is to light a candle, right, for a person in every house. Okay. The Gemara says in Psachim and Daf Zayin that on Pesach there's also a mitzvah to use a candle, right, to search for chametz, right? That's dafka with a candle. Okay, there's different halachas why it's better. The candle, the light of a candle, kind of goes into cracks and it's easier to look in crevices or whatever. So the Gemara, though, fascinatingly uses a pasuk to prove that a candle is necessary to search for chametz. It's a pasuk in Mishlei, in Perik Chav, pasuk Chav Zayin, right? Ner Hashem nishmas Adam. The ner of Hashem is the neshama of a person. Chofes kol chadri batan, right? Who searches all the chadarim, all the rooms in a batan, in a person's stomach. So again, it proves based on this pasuk. Apparently, says Rav Pinkus, right? The fact that we light Hanukkah, light candles on Pesach, is that we're looking for something, right? Ner, right, is chofes, right? Ner is lechapes, right, to look for something, right? Ner Hashem nishmas adam chofes kol chadri batan. And apparently that has an application on Hanukkah as well. Apparently on Hanukkah, right, when we light candles, we're also looking and searching for something. And says Rav Pinkus, fascinatingly, right, we're not looking for the light. We're looking for the darkness. And what he means is as follows. He says when someone is blind, right, they don't realize, right, that they're in darkness. Right? They don't realize what they're missing. I mean, when a person, right, only when a person lights a candle, right, if a person is not blind, right, if a person is able to light a candle, and that sheds light on wherever they are, right, that only then does a person realize that they've been in the darkness all along. And says on Rav Pinkus, on Hanukkah, when we light Hanukkah candles, right, and we remind ourselves that Akash Baruch Hu and the way of the Torah is the way to keep us going, Ner Mitzvah Torah Or, right, we're trying to recognize the darkness that we've been in all along. Right, so Pinkus points out that there are two things that are referenced as choshech, right, in Chazal. First of all, Olam Haza, as we pointed out, Mesilas Yesharim discusses it. Right, Pasuk says in Tehillim, and Perik Kuf Dalet Pasuk Chaf, Tashes Choshech Vihi Laila, right, and the Gemara quotes this pasuk in Bava Metzia on Daf Pei Gimel. Right, it says Zeh Olam Haza Shedom El Laila, that this world is compared to darkness, to nighttime. Okay, and we pointed out, Mesilas Yesharim talks about this as mentioned. In addition, as we mentioned, Golus Yavan, the exile of Yavan, is referred to as Choshech, right? That's what we pointed out before, and Pinkus explains, right, that even though, right, the Greeks were destroyed by the Romans, and the Romans are really the one who destroyed the Beis Hamikdash and spilled our blood over the last 2,000 years. Now it's shifting over to Yishmael a little bit, but okay, right? Mitzvah Hashem, we should be victorious over them as well, right? But all of the philosophy that we have engulfed over these past 2,000 years, right? Sports, science, entertainment, that's all rooted, right, in Greece. And while all that stuff we surround ourselves with, right, we think all that stuff is great, as we mentioned, right? All the Goyim talking about is technological advancement, enlightenment, philosophical advancement, right? Chazal called that darkness, right? So on Hanukkah, right, we light the candles and we dispel, right, this darkness because this is what we assume to be light. When we grow up in it, right, we assume that all this stuff that we surround ourselves with is actually the light. So the Hanukkah candles come and tell us, no, 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 all that stuff that you thought was light is actually darkness. Right? And we assume, says Rav Pinkus, that science and nature and technology are a contradiction to Emunah B'tachon. Right? You ever hear of some head of university or head of a department in a college? If that person is from, right, that's a chiddush. Right, that's a chiddush. Right, when boys go to university, right, from homes, very often the kippah gets smaller and smaller and smaller until the kippah disappears completely. Ask Rav Pinkus, why should that be? Why shouldn't nature and science be a way of recognizing Kodesh Baruch Hu, right? Of seeing all the amazingness and specificity of creation? Why doesn't that make a person frummer? Right? Again, I've mentioned it before in the past that I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy, as you guys know. Ricky Gervais has a comedy special called Supernatural. Now, Ricky Gervais is an avowed atheist, and he talks about it all the time. And there's a point in that special where he goes on and on about why he named the special supernatural. And he goes on and on about how science is exact and amazing and minute and detailed. And then he goes on a rant about how when you die, you're just going to go into nothingness and everything will disappear and it's all coincidence. And you listen to that and you're like, you're a smart guy. How is that possible that you just went from A to B? Uh, There's got to be something behind that. It's not just a coincidence that, there are a bajillion, as Rapinkus points out, that, there are just a bajillion computer functions going on in a person's brain at every single second. And we get impressed like when you have an AI that can do your homework for you, right? How is that possible that a Kosh Baruch Hu, right? That you're saying a Kosh Baruch Hu doesn't exist. So says Rapinkus, he explains that in the scientific world, right, you're taught to search for answers in a lab, right? Whatever the lab produces, that's the proofs that you have. Right? It doesn't occur to you that there may be answers outside the lab, right? Outside the measurements and the proofs, or that maybe you're using the wrong measurements, right? Maybe you're using your eyes, right, and your physical senses to determine something that's not physical. And it says, points out fascinating. That's why the language of the Medrash is so exact. The Medrash says, again, that why do we compare Greek to Choshech? Because Hechshicha Eineihem Shel Yisrael B'Gzerosayim. He made the eyes of Israel dark with their Gzeros. Right? Because there's nothing that blinds a person like their eyes. Right? Because a person who trusts just their eyes and you decide what you see is real and what you don't see is not real, right? That's a person who is in darkness. Right? The Greeks told everyone to look at their world with their eyes and their eyes alone. The problem is that many things, right, that exist in this world you can't see with your eyes. Right? Forget spirituality. Right? There are sound waves, there's electricity, right? Whatever. You can come up with five more examples. Our senses tell us one thing, but the reality is something else. So on Hanukkah, the candlelight that we light, the victory we're trying to achieve, right, is to open up our eyes to the darkness that we're actually in, right? A person who thinks they're in a lighted room doesn't feel a need to dispel the darkness, right? Only when we light the Hanukkah candles and we divulge what we really thought was light was actually darkness, right? What we were relying on to guide our lives, our physical senses, our philosophy, our moral judgments from Western and Greek culture, that was all actually darkness. And that's what we're trying to discover and find and look for, right, on Hanukkah. So he gives a mashal that will translate into modern times, right? He says it about newspapers, but okay, right, we'll translate it for modern times. He says when a person wakes up in the morning, they're in darkness, right? They don't know what's been happening. Right? They haven't heard about any news. They don't know what's going on in New York, Moscow, whatever country it is. Right? So then you turn on your phone, right? And all of a sudden you're enlightened. Right? This is going on politically, and that's going on in Europe, and this is happening in the Far East. And your phone opens up, right, your world. It enlightens your world. He says, yet that's the darkest you can be, right? When you obsess over what's going on Instagram or social media or Fox News or CBS News or whatever it is, when you get upset at this political activist or you align yourself with this influencer or decide your day based on this news story or that YouTube video, or you're nervous because you saw a video about this and you won't do this, that's the greatest darkness there is. Right? You speak to people who are fully plugged in. Let's just to use an old man example because I'm an old man. To people who are fully plugged in, right, to the political commentator scene in the States, right, with this right wing and that left wing commentator and this, but and and you feel just exhausted by all the yelling and accusing and fear mongering. Whenever a person like that, let's say someone of my age, takes a week off, so you speak to that person after a week, it's liberating, right? You don't feel anxious. There's nothing, you don't get angry in the morning when you start your day with outrage. So it's that's what we're talking about on Hanukkah, to take a step back, to think about the light in your life, and think about if that's really light or is that really darkness? Right. Again, I would argue that the fringe minhagim, right, on Hanukkah also are talk about this stuff, like giving gelt, right, giving sufganiyot, right, how we spend our money, right, how we eat and drink, right. That's also kind of involved in this idea on the periphery. As an aside, I saw quoted, I don't know if it's true, I saw quoted by Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that eating sufganiyot on Hanukkah is a segula for parnasa. Is it really? I don't know. I saw it quoted. Works for me because I'm eating them anyway. Whatever. But that's the idea. Really, it's the light of the candles, the light of Kiner Mitzvah of the Torah, or the light of the Torah, that causes us to rethink our darkness and how deep we are in it. Now, Pincus just finishes off, and we'll finish off with this as well, with a quote from the Rambam, right, in the Moreh Nevuchim. It's really fascinating, so I'm going to quote it for you, as I'll try and do it quickly. He writes in Chelik Gimel Perik Nun Aleph, "K'sha'adam choshev al Hashem yisborach harehu nimtza bo'oto b'po'al." When a person thinks about Hashem, he's found with Him. He's actively with Hashem. Aval ata achi kishatisa mechshevasecha lemachal. When a person eats, right? Okay. Nifsak kesher b'poel ve'eincha imo od hu eno imcha. Right? When a person goes again, when you're thinking about a Kodesh Baruch Hu, then you're with him. But when you start to go do something physical, right? So then he's not with you. Right? Aval imtinsa ben adam shalom mafsik machshavaso b'Hashem yisbarach. But if you find someone who doesn't stop thinking about Hashem, right? Gam kishu ochel ve'oseh be'asakav, even when he's eating, right? And also or doing his whatever he needs to do, his parnasa, etc. Any omer shezeh malas kol neviim ela malas ha'avos aleim alav shalom. That's not only the mila of the prophets, that's the mila of the avos. And he goes on to explain, right, how Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, when they didn't deal with this world or this physical world, right, in any different way than they dealt with Akash Baruch Hu specifically, right? The example I can think of, right, is in Parshas Vayera, where Avram is being visited by Akash Baruch Hu after his surgery, after his bris milah, right, and he sees Malachim, and the pasuk says, "Vayomar Adonai imna matzah zichem beinecha al not havor me'al avdecha." Right? He said, right, my master, right, if you find favor in your eyes, right, don't leave me. And Rashi says there's two opinions. Either he was talking to Malachim, or he was talking to Akash Baruch Hu. Right? One opinion is that Avram was saying, Hashem, please don't leave me for a second. Right? It was as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu was always in his shadow. Now, obviously, we're not on that level, right? But that's what the Rambam is saying. Right? This Ramelech talks about this as well. Right? It's shaykh for us to remember at least that Hashem is always there. Right? Again, the Hu Levado, right? Hu Levado Osa Vyasa is Kol Amasa, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing all the things behind the scenes. Even when we're dealing with school or dating or applying for jobs or whatever, right? Even when we're involved in things that need to get taken care of, right, on a physical level, right? If we remember who is actually guiding our hand and leading us to success, that will save us, right, from the darkness, right, of having to deal with physical things, because we do live in a physical world, but our job is to live a holy life, right, in a physical world, and this is our challenge, right, on Chanukah. And so again, it says the Rambam that is the level of the avos, right, to open our eyes and realize that Yavan hichshech eneim shel Yisrael b'gzeroseim, that Greece, right, made the eyes of the Jews dark with their gzeros, right? Our eyes is not necessarily, right, what dictates what reality. We have to view reality like Avram Avinu, as if he was always walking with a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Torah and mitzvos, right? Kiner mitzvah the Torah, or Torah is the light that has to guide our lives, right? That's the true light and the true, right, path the thing that we should use to guide our path in life. Right? And mitzvah, if we're able to internalize these messages, right? So then we'll really take Hanukkah and kind of that'll catapult us through, right, the darkness, right, of the winter. All right, everybody, have a great Lichtige Hanukkah. Great to see you guys. Shkoyach Gadol for coming. I know it's hard. I know you guys. If you left to light candles, it's fine. And it's a shame.